Good morning, and thank you so much for the invite and opportunity to come and share a few words and some perspectives. It's good to be among friends, and Kim Gertler is a friend. We lived on the same street for a long period of time, and as you all know, she's a tour de force. When she asks you to do something, the only option is to say yes. So I actually delayed my trip to the Pan Am Games to come be here with you. So I'm not an athlete, as you might be able to tell, but I am on the Canadian Olympic Committee board, so I'm going down under those responsibilities. I know we have other friends in the room. I already said good morning to Jessica Fraser-Thomas from the Northumberland Y. Where are you, Jessica? Over there. I shamelessly said on one of a call with their CEO from her Y that I liked the hats they had for a program. So they're like hunting hats. So she brought me two this morning. So it was great getting gifts coming in. So thanks very much. I want to start off by, and I know you already had an opening this morning, but I want to start off in saying Bojo, being in Dishnakas, Mikejeje Dodem, Korthanishnabe and Dunjaba, Adawa and Dodnis. My name is Peter Dinsdale. I'm from Curve Lake First Nation near Peterborough, Ontario. It is a real honor to be here, and I do want to acknowledge that we're on the land of the unceded people, the Algonquin, and so many other nations today call Odawa here their home from all across Turtle Island. And you know, increasingly, when I go to corporate events in particular, not so much this one, but they can feel awkward. Land acknowledgements can feel trite, or someone reads it and can't pronounce the name or don't know the community. Or I'll tell you that traditionally, land acknowledgements were really meant to make sure that you knew which land you were in. There's no border control. There was no CBSA official to declare your fruits and vegetables as you came across the border. And you didn't live in one house year round. You occupied a territory. You would live somewhere to fish a certain time of the year, or hunt a certain time of year, or harvest different crops. And you would move as a community. And sometimes different people would move to the same areas. So you're very careful always about where you were. You would say, I acknowledge that I'm on this other person's territory today because I'm doing this work. I'm harvesting these resources. And I thank them for taking care of this land and allowing me to be here to do this work that we're doing today. So there's no confusion about my intentions. I'm not here to take it. I'm not here to own it. I'm not here to claim it. I'm here to use it. And so when we do landing, and they've evolved after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they've evolved to this place in time where we now pause at the start of events and acknowledge whose territories that we're on. That's where it comes from. But I think it has an important evolution today that's helpful to remind us in this era of reconciliation that we have work to do, that we're always on someone else's territory. I'm Ojibwe. This is Algonquin territory. This is not my territory, but acknowledge that I'm here. And so it can be awkward. I appreciate it. But in the moments that you have, when you do it, just to reflect whose land has this been? What is the history of this place now that we're all doing work here? It's not to exclude the other, it's to bring everyone in. So I want to provide that perspective. And increasingly, I'm trying to do that because reconciliation, it seems like maybe we're at peak reconciliation. Maybe someone's going to get frustrated with all these conversations about land acknowledgement and wokeness and all the rest of it, but there's an intentionality behind it. And if we're clear about that, I think the practice becomes a little more easy. So anyway, I'm really honored to be here again as this morning. I want to share a couple elements. And I know I've been asked to talk about First Nation partnerships and how they've evolved and how I think about them, how I've seen them, and some tips maybe for you to use as you think about them in your work. But to do that, I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to position, kind of how I've come to understand this, and maybe give one specific example in particular about work we're doing that we're doing today that I'm actually, this is live. This is not a theory. And then maybe some next steps for you professionally, and maybe even for you personally as you continue through this journey on yourself. So my personal background. These are all the places that I've kind of been through my journey, from the start of university through Indigenous organizations, both on the ground, a place called Native Child and Family Services in downtown Toronto, to regional service delivery with the Ontario Federation of Indian Friendship Centers, to national level leadership, and then with AFN. I call the AFN like my White House years. They gave me all my gray hairs the time I was there under National Chiefs Atleo and Bellegarde, but it was a tremendous experience. And now at YMCA Canada. So this is the first job I've ever had not with an Indigenous community, and that comes with some interesting cultural dynamics as you learn to lead. I've also have a board journey. So I was on YMCA Canada's board before I came on this board. I'm on the Canadian Olympic Committee board. I've been in many others, now in corporate boards as well. And the principles I'm about to share with you are the same whether or not you're an Anishinaabe person walking and living in this 21st century, and the work that we do here today, as a board member, as a staff, or as someone trying to get something done in the communities. So what are the principles of partnership? So it's all these experiences that I bring to this talk, and it's all these perspectives that I want to outline and how we move forward. But, like any good Canadian, I'll tell you all these things they are not and apologize for that. This is clearly not legal advice. This is partnerships for us as community people trying to do community benefits. There are a bunch of legal obligations that do exist that may impact rights that community members have. I imagine for the most part, sport doesn't do that, but I just want to be clear about what I'm talking about. The Supreme Court of Canada has 2 court cases called Haida and Taiku that talk about the duty to consult and the duty to accommodate Indigenous communities when you're coming to do a partnership. That is a different standard than what I'm talking about today. You want to build a pipeline through a community, you're going to infringe upon a right. Maybe it's the right to resources, the right to the animals that go, and maybe a river. The corporation has a legal obligation under a Supreme Court to consult. That's not what I'm talking about. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, you might have heard of, is a higher standard, is an international standard. And they have something called the free, prior, and informed consent, which is even more there's more obligations than there is the duty to consult and accommodate. So it's free. A community can't be coerced into any of these conversations. It's prior. You can't have started it before you come in. It's informed. Corporations have teams of lawyers and resources to talk about what they're doing. First Nations have to have an equal opportunity to be equally resourced. And then the last one is consent. You have to agree. And I remember politically, they would ask our leaders, does that mean you have a veto? We could never say yes because the Canadian public would lose their minds about it and we'd lose support. But in fact, I think most First Nation communities believe they would have a veto. So these are different principles. We can dig into them. I've had to work through them politically in my old roles. That's not what these are. But these are general principles and partnerships of how that we can work together moving forward. And I think for the most part, one of my mentors would say, this is like the Indian laws of common sense. And that's really what we're talking about here. And who's benefiting from the opportunity that you have that you're trying to bring forward to a community? Be really clear about who has the benefit, and is it exploitive? Are you coming in with the savior mentality? You're coming to save the community. We got this great thing you'd never be able to do if it wasn't for us. We get a lot of that, believe it or not. Is it going to be, how respectful are you in your relationships? Are you there to work together? Are you there only to get what you want? And every single community is different. You've been to one community, you've been to one community. There are some things we can do to approach it in a way that's standardized and can help you work together. I think there's a lot of learning. There's learning that you have to do with the community, including myself when I go to different Indigenous communities, because we're as diverse as Europe is. When we go to communities, you have to learn a lot about each other and learn a lot about what the opportunity is and how we might work together. And I think the most important thing is appreciate this as a partnership. That's as a co-creation model, that there's a way and opportunity for us to work together. So all within this, there's values that we have in our communities, and sometimes value judgments or misunderstandings can conflict when you come in and have these first relationships. There's a lot going on in this wheel, and so I'm a Ojibwe, so for me, this is the right way. Other nations will have different examples, but I just want to provide an example of how we think about things within the community. I use this wheel in terms of culture-based management and culture-based approach. In the middle, you'll see a version of a medicine wheel. You'll see 4 directions, 4 colors, and that represents many different things. Typically, there's 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter, represented by yellow, red, black, and white. There's 4 colors of man we have in our teachings, our creation stories. And each color of man was given their original creation stories and how they should live their lives and their instructions and gifts and sent off to live. There are 4 ways of being as a human being: is your physical, your mental, your emotional, and your spiritual. And our elders tell us that if any of these things are out of balance, then you as a human being will be out of balance and not following through on your life. There are 4 sacred medicines. There are 4 elements. I mean, it's a very basic principle that we have. Built upon that, so this idea is that no one is superior, that we're all equal, that we have to have this balance. So think about that with respect to a partnership. The partnership may seem uneven as you come in, but this idea of balance as we go through, that we all have gifts to bring, is really reflected deeply in our culture and how we try to approach a lot of these elements. Now, on the outside is a little more complicated. This is the 7 grandfather teachings, and most nations will have something very similar. I'll describe it a little bit different, and it's a really important tool. They say actually in the language is mino bamatsuan, is how to live the good life, is to follow these 7 grandfather teachings. And as I will walk through them very quickly, we'll give you the Coles Notes versions of the 7 grandfather teachings and what they mean and how to apply them. But it's also a really important way of thinking and approaching from a value-based system, the nature of your partnerships, and how you want to work together. It all starts with respect. And respect is represented by the buffalo. And it really is, obviously, we need to respect each other and respect that we all have gifts and we all have goals and we all have visions and we all have dreams. And it's represented by the buffalo because the buffalo respects us so much that it gave its life for us. So we have to use everything from that buffalo to honor that respect. Its hide, its meat, its bone for tools, everything in that animal we have to utilize. And if we don't show it respect, it won't come back and we'll actually learn a pretty hard lesson. You'll go hungry and you won't have homes to live in. The second area is wisdom, and it's represented by a beaver. And our elders say you're wise when you know what the problem is, you know how to fix it, and you do it without ever being told what to do. And it's represented by the beaver because when you hear running water, it knows that its original instructions are to take down the trees and dam that water up, which helps the entire ecosystem. And by the way, if a beaver doesn't do that, his teeth will continue to grow. It actually grows up in the back of his head and it will die. So wisdom is a really important teaching that we're supposed to live by. Love is the next teaching, is represented by the eagle, the bald eagle, because it flies the highest and it brings all of our prayers to the Creator. It sacrifices for us to bring that message up. Now, love can be the mushy love that we love each other and we have affinity for each other. But love can also be that we all can succeed. That for me to do well doesn't mean that you can't do well. I want you to do well in your work, just as I want everyone to do well. Even folks I don't agree with, I want them to be successful. So I love them in that way, that I want them to have a fulfilling life and to fulfill their goals and their way forward. Courage is represented by the bear, and particularly the mother bear. If you ever get between a bear and her cub, you'll know what courage really means. And courage also means that you know the thing to do and you do it even though you know it's going to cause you harm. You report to a board that money was misspent by your CFO. You know it's going to give you harm, so you should have known. You go into a partnership and you tell them, here's the right thing to do. Even though you know it's not going to be the best for you and your organization, you do it anyway because you have to have that courage. It's the right thing to do. Honesty is represented by Bigfoot or Sabi in our culture. And it says that when you're honest about who you are and what your gifts are, your spirit will be as big as the Bigfoot. But if you are fake and you pretend that you're something that you're not, your spirit will be small as a field mouse. So it's about being true to who you are. And when you have that honesty in your words and your dealings, your spirit will grow and you will have a bigger spirit and you'll have a bigger presence as you move forward. Humility. Humility is represented by the wolf. If you ever see the wolf, it's pretty much the apex predator in this area. We could debate about cougars, whether or not they're here or not. But when you cross a wolf in the wild, the first thing it does is put its head down. And we say that's a sign of respect, that it respects you, and it's humility that respects our gifts. So the teaching is we all have gifts, and the humility is not to think less of yourself, but to think of yourself less, and to think of others, and to acknowledge that we all have gifts. I can come up to a mic and I can talk to a room of people. Other people have different gifts. One's not better than the other, back to that balance conversation, that I'm to respect your gifts and you're to respect mine. And by the way, it also means using my gifts, not hiding my gifts, whatever they are. It's not pretending I don't have them. So humility is acknowledging and using those gifts, but acknowledging as well that others have them as well. And the final one to share is truth. And truth is represented by the turtle. And if you look at the back of a turtle, it has its inner rings and its outer rings. Its inner rings have 13 markings, and its outer have 28. It's a calendar for us. And the truth of the universe is contained in there. And the teachings are, when you think of the rest of these teachings from Mina Bamatsuan, the truth will reveal itself in terms of how you're supposed to behave. So I use this wheel in all kinds of issues and all kinds of things that I deal with personally from a culture-based management perspective. But I think I'm not asking you to go through this exercise yourself every time you have a partnership, but I want to give you an example of a value-based approach that if you went through this as a system and as a regiment, you actually come up with different decisions and you find yourself behaving in different ways. Let me give you an example. let's say I'm coming to speak to you about this speech here. In fact, I'm going to come. Kim asked me to come speak about First Nations partnerships. So, I want to respect the request that Kim has and the knowledge that you probably want in your work and where you want to move forward. It'd be easy for me to say no because I want to be in Santiago wearing my cool Lululemon kit and be in Santiago. That's going to be pretty cool. But I do want to respect the work we have. And I'm on the Canadian Olympic Committee. I do other work. I view this as a part of a mission. So I want to be respectful and truthful to that mission. There's some wisdom that I can share. There's wisdom that I can share with you that maybe you can use in your work and you can help amplify and share in communities. I want you all to do well. I love every single one of you, and I want you to be successful in the work that you do in your communities and in your organizations. I don't know everything about it, so I got to come and be sure that I'm being honest about what it is that I'm presenting from a courage perspective and the lessons we have and mistakes that we've made. So I want to be able to make sure to share that, even though it might have consequences. You might think less of me and my presentation, but it's more important to do so. Same thing around humility, that I can't pretend I'm someone that I'm not. I'll give cultural teachings, but I know I will give cultural lessons. I'm not a teacher. I'm not an elder. And I'm not perfect in my life, and I don't want to pretend, in these conversations that, I live all these perfectly. That's an ongoing balance. And there's a humility. I don't know everything. There could be folks in this community that have done way better, in this room here, that have done way better partnerships than I have done. But, at the end, there's a truth that's a great opportunity to come and share what I do know with you. Maybe there's something that you can take away. And at the end, there's something we can all move forward on. So that's one example. I've done it when I've had to reorganize my staff. I've done this when I had to fire people. I've done this when I thought about career change and what it is that I want to do as a human being. So for partnerships, there's a value, and this is ingrained. I mean, not everything this explicitly, and this, the teachings are quite deep, and I'm giving you the Coles notes of it. But this notion, this version, this spirit that we're bringing into the conversation is a spirit that you should approach communities with. This idea of balance and how we're going to move forward. Because you can appreciate this entire country is seized right now with this opportunity around working with Indigenous communities, and particular reconciliation. And it comes as an outreach of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is a picture of the commissioners unboxing their report. One of the great honors I had while at the Assembly of First Nations is actually a member of the TRC All-Party Committee. I like to remind people that Canada did not wake up one day and decide we're going to reconcile with Indigenous peoples. You know what? That residential school thing wasn't a great idea. It was a class action lawsuit by survivors suing churches and governments for what they did. And the government and churches settled because they were guilty. And their fines would have been a lot greater than anything survivors got or the country got out of it. But one of the things, so I represented the Assembly of First Nations on this all-party committee to the class action lawsuit. One of the things that the elders wanted to make sure we had was a commission, so that the stories of residential school survivors didn't just fade away. They just didn't get a payout, an apology in the House, and that was it. They wanted a reconciliation commission to go out and do hearings, publish a report, so all of Canada can see what happened and we can find a pathway forward. And they've been wildly successful. I'm not sure I'd be here talking to you today about partnerships with First Nation communities. I'm not sure I would be an Ojibwe CEO of YMCA Canada. I'm not sure corporations all across Canada would be talking about reconciliation if it wasn't for work of the commissioners. So we owe them a huge debt of gratitude from where we're at and where we're going. And in 2016, I left the Assembly of First Nations as their CEO to move to YMCA Canada. And at that time, there's a recent suicide crisis, the most recent suicide crisis in Attawapiskat, where 11 young women had committed to killing themselves on a certain point in time. And thankfully, it was prevented prior to it happening. They sent elders and community and cultural people up to the community. And what do you want? What do you need? They did a workshop. And at the top of one of the flip charts, they said they wanted a YMCA. Now, it's not a YMCA per se. They wanted a community center, a place to go to, some place they feel welcome, some place they feel like they can work together and have hope, frankly, as kids in this community do and communities I see all across Canada and frankly the world. And we did a lot of work. At first, by the way, I was resisting taking up the call because I did, in my first job outside of the Indigenous community, I did not want to be the First Nations CEO of YMCA Canada. I want to be the CEO of YMCA Canada that happened to be First Nations. But 6 months later, as this call kept coming, I was like, we got to do something. And I knew how to navigate it. I knew the regional chief. I knew the local chief. I understood the politics. I understood the dynamics. Maybe this is one of my truths, why I'm here to do this kind of work and do this opportunity. So my board chair and some youth and some local Y leaders, we all went to Attawapskat, met with the chief, met with the regional chief and the Anishinaabe Nation chief, and talked about how can we help, what could we do. Through their advocacy, they ended up getting money from the provincial government to open a recreation facility. So we helped them with policies, we helped them with staffing, we helped them work through the Jumpstart Foundation because they were anyway, through some of the charitable issues, we ended up being able to get material up there. But they didn't need us in that community. But I'll tell you, from my work, I knew we're needed everywhere else. The suicide crisis in Attawapskat was not unique to Attawapskat. It exists in First Nation communities all across the country, and in Métis communities, and in Inuit communities. But I knew how to navigate the First Nation community questions. So we started this project. What would it look like for us to take this on as a goal? And YMCA Canada, a lot like your organizations and all organizations across the country, were grappling with this journey, that there was this TRC call to action, that we at YMCA Canada were doing certain things. We did our own statements, we're taking our own concrete steps, we're doing work, but I felt like we've got to do something tangible. So out of it came this idea that we do something called the Ojibwe Project, which is Ojibwe for the Bridge Project. And because I'm Ojibwe, I got to name it. That's one of the great things about being the boss. You can call it. Crees can name things after Cree, and but anyway, this is an Ojibwe project. So this is the Ojibwe Project. And what would it be like for us to build centers of community in First Nation communities? Like a full functioning YMCA, you see the Taggart Family Y when you're driving by. Why don't we have one of those in Attawapskat or in Curve Lake, or in Wikwemicon, or anywhere across the country where it's needed? So we thought it would do a lot of things. And to be honest, we went through this exercise I brought you through earlier. We would gain from this if we're honest about the gain. Yeah, we could put a Y there and we can impact that community. It would impact our entire federation, probably the global federation, if we're able to integrate and bring in Indigenous culture from the communities, programming, and extend it elsewhere across the country and in fact across the world. So we went and talked to some of our partners, and we're able to leverage organizations like Community Foundations of Canada, which have so much capital wrapped up in these community foundations that they're willing to do social impact investing and outright grants to help support work of this nature. United Way Canada was willing to help us fundraise for these centers of community. So we're in this emergent partnership because we have to find one that works. And because everyone likes details, I'll give you a couple of details on it. And I'm going to tell you about the principles of our partnership. Maybe we built a 40,000 square foot facility. Perhaps we think about all the capital expenditure and we have a sense of how much it costs to operate, inflationary costs. Of course, we guess 3% inflation. No one guessed what we're going through right now. But anyway, maybe on an aggregate, we'll be closer to 3%. And this is the YMCA that we built many, many times all across the country. Anyone here from Hamilton area? All right, so this is the Flamborough YMCA, basically. So we've replicated the Flamborough YMCA probably 15 times across the country. So we know what it costs to build, we know what it costs to operate. We're really hesitant to show this because of all the principles I'm about to talk about, because I don't want to come to a community and say, here's your why, take it or leave it. But people need to be inspired a little bit to say, what are the potential? What is it that we could do? So we would have a YMCA that would have a pool in the front. I don't know if there's facility operators here, but that's the most expensive thing you can put in a building. And it's the most dangerous thing from a risk perspective as any CFOs in the building that we can put in. You have kids drowning, you have you have lifeguard requirements, you have all the issues of mold and everything to run, as I'm learning. These tanks are the worst thing to put in a building, but you have to have a pool. Because I don't want a ghetto YMCA. If we're going to do this, we're going to build a full-service YMCA. We're going to have change rooms. We're going to have a gym for basketball. We're going to have multi-purpose rooms. We're going to have a second floor with treadmills and weight rooms and spin classes and all of the rest, all of the above. And you know what? The community will take it and it'll make it its own. We give them a sample of programs. You could run all the things you see on here. Indigenous communities have lots of really interesting diabetes and health programs and Aboriginal Head Start programs and cultural programs. This building could do so much. They say, look, there's schools on reserve. Why don't you just use the schools for these things? Because the schools are used for students and everything else. We need gyms. We need gyms for sport and physical activity and recreation. And we need gyms for just community building. So we go to communities and we show them this. And we say, this is our Ojibwe project. That we're in active discussions right now with 3 communities. I don't know where I am right now, but I think last weekend, maybe I was in Curve Lake First Nation, which happened to be my home community. We can talk about nepotism later. And they're really open to actually having a why there. So we did a community consultation. We're moving forward into this next phase. I'll talk about a little bit. There's 3 other First Nations and they're not ready to be named yet. So I won't be in the community that are in early active conversations. So this is how we live the principles that I was talking to you about. That we come in and we say, this is who we are. It's easier in my own reserve because I call the chief and say, hey, I'm here in this role now and something I want to talk about. My old role at AFN, I would know some of the chiefs, so it's maybe a little bit easier. But in any of your roles, I would call to say, this is who we are. This is what we're doing. What are your priorities? What are you doing? Could we imagine working together in some way? Right? Very, very basic things. Particularly with the Ojagin project, then we would talk about a role clarification. It's really sticky First Nation land. Who's going to own the building, who's going to run it, where are the staff coming from, operating costs. You can imagine the plethora of challenges, but we do role clarification really early. If we get through that first gateway, I kind of think these as gateways. If we get through the first one, they think it's a good idea, they want to go to the second gateway, we talk about what we would need to bring, how might it work. Then we can start to formalize that relationship a little bit more. And we formalize it through roles that we're going to do this, you're going to do that. We have a local YMCA that has to come in to actually help us operate because believe me, you don't want me operating. I'm not an operator. And we talk to the community about what their roles are. When it comes to fundraising, who's going to do the ask? Who's going to hold the money? How are we going to approach this? Then we do community consultations. This is where we're at with Curve Lake. We actually went to the community to say, all right, this is what we're thinking about. Do you have any issues? YMCA Canada, does anyone know what YMCA stands for? Not the board member. Does anyone else know? All right, what does it stand for? Yeah, I'm not young. I'm still a man. I'm certainly not Christian.
There was also the Young Hebrew.
And YWCA. Yeah, we've been offered hundreds of $millions to become the Young Men's Muslims Association too. Like there's a big push everywhere to own it. We're a secular organization in Canada. And we're about to pass a resolution to say that YMCA Canada no longer is an acronym that means Young Men's Christian Association. It is a noun and it means inclusion and belonging for everyone. So hopefully that will be no problem for me to pass that in Canada. It's going to be a huge controversy internationally, let me tell you, because it matters in Germany, in Africa, in Latin America, and south of the Mason-Dixon line, essentially in the States and elsewhere. But hey, you're in these roles and you got to stir it up sometimes. That's what I'm doing. I got sidetracked. So maybe in the community consultation, because the history and legacy of residential schools are saying, well, you're a Christian organization. I'm not really comfortable with this. And so we have to be able to answer those questions. So it's about being honest about our history and our past and our legacy and how we might be able to work together. Only then do we get to the model development. Only then do we say, here's the real sketch of what your building would look like. And now let's cost it out. And now that 40,000 square foot wide now has, 2 rinks in it, because every First Nation community wants a rink. 2 rinks in it. It has a second gym and it has this and it has that. And we're bringing, and now this is this huge thing. Are we willing to go forward? Are we willing to take this risk together? And then we'll do our legal agreements. I haven't got to operations yet. This is to get us to the operating principles we're about to move forward. So hopefully you get a sense of the pacing and the approach that you need to take. And let me tell you, I will be honest, it takes a lot of patience. It takes lots of patience from me, and I'm from the community. I can't imagine coming from out of the community. I call them, they don't call me back. They're not interested in this, or there's a lot of interest in working with Indigenous communities today. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there, to be frank, coming and selling the next visionary thing that's going to save them and their community forever. And so I think you have to have a lot of patience, and I do respect sometimes we can be difficult to work with. Now, speaking as an Indigenous community member, you're worried about triggering, you're worried about saying the wrong thing, calling us the wrong word, stumbling over something. Those are real things, and we need to acknowledge them early on. I think you need to be intentional about what you want. What are your values that you're bringing into this conversation, and what do you want out of it? And how can you work together to make sure, really, frankly, that everyone's winning? But you see what I'm saying here. It is an amazing time. It's an amazing time that the sports system is having this conversation, thinking about, how are we going to work together? I'm on the Canadian Olympic Committee, not because I'm a former Olympian, but because I challenge them the same way. How many Indigenous athletes are in the Pan Am Games today? How many should there be? What are the barriers? What if there is an amazing runner in Attawapiskat that's the greatest runner the world has ever seen, better than Usain Bolt? How would we ever know? And wouldn't Canada be better if all those stories were unearthed? And how do we get up there? And how do we make sure, look at young Indigenous kids, for the most part, don't imagine themselves being on the podium of the Olympics. is something you don't see themselves, they don't see others there. How do we create a culture in a country where that is something realistic that they can think about as they move forward? And sport, now I'm ranting a little bit. I'm not running for election, I promise you. But sport can be a real important movement for reconciliation. As many challenges as we have with Canada in our history and treaty making and residential schools and assimilation, and we can go through the list. When Carey Price is in net for Team Canada, we all wear Team Canada, we all cheer. When Mary Spencer wins boxing medals, we all cheer. When you go through the list, we celebrate the Canadian athletes that were there, the very, very best, and we need a lot more of it. And I know you and your work feed into it. We're doing work in safe sport, of course, as well with the Canadian Olympic Committee, and it's great to see that you're doing that work. I know you're working towards inclusion in different ways, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come to share a little bit about how I approach it, the work we're doing, and hopefully how you can think about your work when you move forward. The last thing, I probably should have done this in reverse because it feels like I'm wrapping up. There's a lot of resources out there. And when I left AFN, I didn't have an appreciation for how much Canadians were nervous about saying the wrong thing or doing a wrong thing. And then frankly, almost wouldn't do anything because you don't want to say something wrong or make a misstep. And unless you're from the community or have an entry into the community, it can be very intimidating. I brought my staff to the reserve to go and talk to the chief and council, and they were really freaked out about it. You're going to see a mayor. Can't tell chiefs that, but it's like you're going to see a mayor. Think of it that way. It's like it's a government. It's a council. You're going to go talk to them. You're not going to a sacred ceremony where you're going to come out with a new name and an eagle feather in your hair. You're simply going to talk to the chief and council. And there's some protocols for sure, but it's nothing that you need to be nervous about, right? You can be comfortable. But it's that we don't know each other enough. We're the other. When I left AFN to go to YMCA Canada, all my Indian friends said, I can't believe that YMCA Canada would hire an Indian. And I went to YMCA Canada. They said, I can't believe you leave AFN to come work at a place like YMCA Canada. We just don't know each other. We don't understand each other. And hopefully that goes away over a period of time. Now I'm really ranting. So hopefully you got something out of it. I'm happy to take any questions you have related to partnerships and this journey or anything else that was in there. So thank you very much, Miigwech, and I really do appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Peter, for your presentation. And thank you for being here. And can you pack us all up and take us to Santiago? That would be fantastic. I also want to personally thank you for your explanation about the land acknowledgement. That was very informative for me, so very much appreciate that. But I would like to open it up for any questions or comments for Peter.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the degree of interest of YMCA in Indigenous communities. Given that among the TRC recommendations, those on sport, I think are some of the biggest success stories in terms of ongoing funding. I do a lot of volunteer work with Indigenous Sport and Wellness Ontario. Are you thinking about, so one of the things I'm thinking about right now is we're trying to find a place to host Family Day weekend, the Ontario Native Invitational Basketball Tournament, and next year we'll be doing the volleyball because they're so big now, we can't find spaces big enough. Is that part of the YMC strategy in terms of having a presence in communities? Because facilities is a huge need in communities. Yeah. So maybe there's alignment there. Is that something you've thought about?
Well, there's probably two things. One is, as you go through that, if you need facilities to run it, let's have a conversation because we have many facilities everywhere. I'm sure they'll open the doors and love to partner with you on it. Secondly, our original vision for the Ojibwe project was 10 communities in 10 regions across Canada to start. That was about a $500 million project. And prior to the pandemic, there was not a lot of interest from the federal government to partner on it because, it's easy to get capital. My leaders always are surprised when I say it. In the federal system, it's easy to get capital on reserve to build a building. Good luck getting recreation funding to operate that building over a set period of time. So we're trying to work with funders. And the reason for 10, by the way, is because there's 10 regional chiefs. My politics line up really, really well where we can get regional chiefs involved with the minister and just thinking through that process. Coming out of the pandemic, we decided to be a little more tactical and go to communities we felt we had a high opportunity for success. So we're starting with 3. I love to have 634 recreation facilities on reserves across Canada. So 10 was the original vision. I don't know how far we'll get. We'll build as many as we can. But maybe implied in your question as you go through, trying to find spaces for these different tryouts and sports, maybe regional as you're thinking through. My son was a part of the National Aboriginal Hockey thing for a bit and going to different areas. So if you're looking for facilities, I'm sure we can find them all across the province for you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for sharing many of your truths within that presentation. Wondering if you could give us an appreciation of time within that process, because certainly you highlighted time, but in terms of years, certainly, but what does that concretely look like?
Well, for my project to build a facility will be years. We're going to a community questionnaire in the community that's farthest along. Let's assume it goes well and we get, general understanding. We have to go to architects and get the drawings done. Then we have to go to fundraising. So we're probably 3 years out of starting any project. Anything you do though, change happens at the pace of trust. If it's the first time you meet them, you say, I have this great partnership. You're not going to have the partnership coming out of that meeting. You're going to have to meet a couple times to understand each other, understand each other's priorities. If anything, I wouldn't rush it. The one oil, what is it? No, what oil in the, thank you, will be elections in communities. So if it's a big project, you get a different election, just like your mayor, it will slow down a project. So depending what you have, make sure you have broad community support in addition to staff support as you go through. Métis and Inuit communities are a little bit different in that regard, but First Nation communities in particular, I think the politics run into it sometimes. So, but I would plan longer than shorter as you go through a lot of these partnerships. Take the time.
Beautiful presentation. I'm sorry I came in a little bit late. Something that I think would be really important to talk about is parachuting and working with corporations and organizations. If you start to sense that they're working with Indigenous communities just to tick that box, or they want to make that relationship and then they want to leave, which is the basis of parachuting. People want to bring amazing programs to a community and they do that, and then when it's done they leave, and then those kids don't have anything anymore. So when you work with organizations that seems to be without maybe knowing that's what they're doing, what do you say, or how do you work with that?
Yeah, I think communities are getting better to sniff this out, by the way. I think that the days of someone coming in and saying, yeah, let's do this, and then being left high and dry at the end are wanting. The federal government and provincial governments are probably the worst ones, because you have a 3 to 5 year funding agreement, as you know, and then it doesn't get renewed, and you set up all this capacity and all this opportunity, and then it's done. So I don't think there's there's a great answer for that. I think there's the communities are more sophisticated in sniffing it out, certainly ones that we work with. I think it comes back again to the intentionality. If you come in early on in the partnership without the trust that builds this long-term, I think people understand things won't last forever too, though, when you're clear about your understanding and truthful about your understanding. I can't speak to it from each community's perspective because they'll view that differently. They may view the opportunity to leverage to do something else down the road. Again, I can't speak to that. I'd be hopefully influence more not you specifically, but anyone's intentionality coming in and how they might approach that relationship, and be honest, like after 3 years, we might be done, and here's what we can do to wrap it up or leave capacity behind or build capacity for it to stay.
Chimigwech, I really appreciated the way that you distinguish between facilities and programming, and I like the metaphor of the bridge. I'm wondering if you have. So I'm from close to North Bay, so it was like a northeast region place, and I think
Whereabouts?
Powassan.
Powassan, great hockey team.
Wasn't me. But I'm wondering if you have examples of YMCA, either programs or partnerships in those kind of places where settler and Indigenous communities are close together, and the YMCA is a place where people come together. So not just the facility, but the way, communities can come together through that.
A couple at the top of the head. First off, we do have a Center of Community in Membertou First Nation, just outside of Sydney, Nova Scotia. It's a partnership with the Cape Breton YMCA. They built a big fancy rink where they hold the National Aboriginal Hockey Championships. Yeah, it's a twin pad, but yeah. And the recreation facility inside, they wanted to brand the Y, so it's actually a YMCA there. That's atypical because of the nature of Membertou and the revenue they have and work that they can do that doesn't exist everywhere. But we have Hamilton, Burlington Brantford works with Six Nations and the Beyond the Bell program. So they bring staff to go work after school programs, help them with employment or their homework and education, and move on. We have Calgary hires a cultural staff from YMCA Calgary to go into a public school to teach Indigenous kids regalia making, so like powwows. They're not kosher costumes, and people think of them as costumes, it's called regalia, and the songs, the drama, how to put on a mini powwow at the end of the year. So you imagine those kids that are come in grades 5, 6, and 7, confused about their culture, their identity, maybe never learnt about it, embarrassed by components of it based on the media and what they see maybe, and certainly some challenging areas of their community, come up with pride about songs and language and want to talk to their grandmother. So it's a beautiful program that Calgary puts on. We have a program of one of our camps, which has probably the most work to do, where they're partnering on Beausoleil Island with the local First Nation, Métis, and Friendship Center community to come in and rename buildings and cabins, to rename to do medicine walks and do teachings about the areas. So when people come in, they meet with an elder, get a proper welcome to the territory, because they're literally on their territory, and then actually name the buildings, understand the medicines that are there. And so it's a beautiful program. So why is it, and look, we're hiring staff. My main focus, frankly, is some of those things, but it's also making sure that our YMCAs look like the communities we serve across the board. And in the West in particular, and North Bay would be an example, there's a large Indigenous community. There's not a large Indigenous staff or large Indigenous board members. I remember not long after we passed a national statement of reconciliation, I was at a Western Y, and I won't name them because it's not a great story. I asked that Y quite innocently in the tour, can you tell me about your relationship with the local Indigenous community here? And the answer I got was, we don't have one because they don't come here. So it wasn't intentional. It was legacy. It's all this shit we're trying to fix. And so have a conversation. Well, really, how many folks work here, and how many are on your board, and what kind of outreach? Have you talked to the community? And so that's what I'm really focused on. I want the programs for sure, because I think it's helpful, but I want these Ys to be for everyone, not a us and them kind of mentality that exists for the transgender community, and it's a huge culture war right now. Well, people don't feel like they belong anywhere. Why wouldn't we make them feel like they belong with us in our communities, and we can all come together, and minorities and everything we can imagine a community I want us to look like. So that's my real focus, I think, as a national organization, but we're certainly sharing best practices, sharing those practices so otherwise can emulate them. There's things I'm sure I'm forgetting because there's so many micro examples. We're trying to do a mobile YMCA in northern BC out of Prince George. So it's not just build a facility in a community or at a Vanderhoof. We're actually taking that to communities, but I want a parachute. Like we want to come and do programs while we can, but then we're gone. But it's pretty cool while we're there doing programs. So I'm trying to reconcile these two things in our minds. So there's a lot of interesting micro initiatives, I would say, underway as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. So happy to call you a friend. So I guess my question, I want to thank you so much first for sharing your wheel and your values and really taking the time to give us that Coles Notes. And I think there was a process there that we really appreciated. Yesterday, talking about safe sport, we talked a little bit about values and about challenges of whose values we're bringing into conversations and how those values were formed and that sort of thing. So I guess my question is just about coming into partnerships, and I love how you sort of talk about that as guiding you and then asking the question of what are your priorities. And I don't know if you can just sort of unpack the process of where do you go from there, and what if the values don't align, and do you work to find common ground on those values, or at what point do you walk away, or what does that process look like?
Well, I'm glad I got an easy one from my YMCA colleague. I think it's, to be frank, I think the values are most misaligned when we deal with governments, to be honest with you, as opposed to corporations or other entities, in part because it's kind of a take it or leave it, or it's a one-sided kind of approach. I think it's less likely in amongst the nonprofit or charitable sector when we try to partner with the Boys and Girls Club, United Way, or on these projects that we're not aligned in those values, thankfully. When we talk to other leaders of political organizations, it can be difficult as well when we talk about our approach. But, I really try to ground myself and my team that our approach isn't necessarily better than theirs. It's just our understanding and how we want to approach it. And maybe it's not the time for a partnership today. We've given up recently a large global youth internship program because of the nature of how the government wanted us to run it and the kinds of things we weren't able to do. So it was a huge 5-year project, but we were just unwilling to move forward. So sometimes it's painful. Like, it's not a straight line. That's not even Indigenous community, non-Indigenous community. It's just us doing our work and how we want to show up in communities and behave. So I'm sorry there's not a great answer for it, but I really do come back to that medicine wheel teaching that, there's no leader in that medicine wheel. They're all equals in that circle. So At the end, you have to check yourself sometimes because we have a superiority mindset, I find at times. An example of when we lost that a little bit was during the George Floyd murder. In Canada, as you know, in the Y movement, I'm not sure if you were involved then, we had a lot of hand wringing. Look, those Americans can't get their crap together. Look what's still happening, right? They're still killing minorities, and look, isn't that terrible? And then the story started to emerge amongst our staff, and we'd have conversations. Well, I was a young black staff at this Y, and when I went to the Membership Plus locker room, because I have the right to as a staff member, the white lawyer in town complained to the front desk that black kids are in there stealing stuff. And what did our Y do? Our Y didn't stand up and say, I'm sorry, you have this misperception. It's a staff person. They said, we're sorry, sir. We'll make sure everything's okay. So they raised it to us like, well, maybe we have something in our own backyard we have to deal with. Never mind reconciliation and safety checks. And so that came into us as well. We had this moral superiority about the states, and we have a lot of work to do here in Canada as well. So I'm ranting a lot this morning. I hope I don't continue to, but I know your question was about specific partnerships, but I think it comes back to that principle about, understanding that, that we're all equal in that wheel. Doesn't mean we have to work with you though, but we're all
Thank you. And do we have a Zoom question?
So it actually came in just as you were mentioning member 2, but there's a participant online who would like you to share some more insights, if you can, about the member 2 YMCA and how that's working in Nova Scotia and how it might differ from other YMCAs in Canada.
Yeah, so it's really small. I mean, it's basically a workout area that they branded as the Y, and certainly as a YMCA, you can buy memberships and member 2 staff. And I talked to Senator Christmas and others from that community, and they really appreciate the pool they go to in Sydney, and it's very, very close. And again, I don't think it's the model everywhere else because of the proximity. Like maybe Rama in Orillia might be one, or Enoch outside of Edmonton. But there's not a lot of similar examples. In fact, a lot of people go to Sydney for other programs and services because how developed member 2 is now. So it's an interesting dynamic that occurred in that community, but it does show it can be done. And we have had some. Jeff Ward was from that community, ended up being the president of that local Y. I think some of those cultural values got enshrined in there. Frankly, he wasn't there long enough, I think, to kind of have a bigger impact. But so I think you see the opportunity, not just around a facility and have impact, but also then to impact our culture at YMCA Canada, which I think is equally as important.
Great, thank you very much. So Kim is telling me that we need to wrap up, and as we've heard what Kim says we do. Thank you again. Thank you for doing what Kim said. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. Thank you for your learnings and for sharing your practices, the rants, everything was fantastic. And I think it's gone more than a little way to help us understand each other. So thank you for being with us today.
Great, thank you.